The Bills' defensive line promises to have a different look and feel in 2026. Let's talk about what happened in 2025 and what the Bills need moving forward today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Well, folks, welcome in. We're talking defensive tackles on today's episode. We'll reflect on what happened in 2025 and set the tone for the offseason and identifying what the Bills need to add to this mix. So we'll start with the veterans Ed Oliver and DaQuan Jones. Then we'll get to the young guys, TJ Sanders and Deion Walker. We'll talk Larry Ogunjobi, a few of the other players in the mix, and then ultimately what the Bills need to get done this offseason along the defensive line. Let's start with Ed Oliver, a 2019 first-round pick, number 9 overall. Ed's 28. He's going to turn 29 in December. He's entering year 3 of his 4-year, $68 million contract. And the Bills have the opportunity this offseason to restructure this deal, and that would free up just under $9 million in cap space. So about $8.9 million in cap space by a restructure of this deal. In 2025, Ed only played in 3 games, and in those 3 games, he was on the field for 59% of Buffalo's defensive snaps. He collected 12 tackles, 7 for loss, 11 pressures, and 3 sacks. He did a lot in 3 games. And as we get into the review, I thought he was exceptional for the 3 games that he was available. And he looked like the guy who closed out 2024 very hot. But unfortunately, 3 games and 108 snaps. That's all he was able to give this defense before suffering the bicep injury that kept him out until the Denver game in the playoffs. And, of course, he gave it a go, wasn't super effective. He had a knee setback along the way. Kind of a lost year for Ed Oliver at the worst imaginable time because of how he finished the 2024 season, because of how he looked when healthy in 2025, and because of what was missing when he wasn't in the lineup. And it was a notable loss. And so as we forecast him into 2026, I'm excited for him to get healthy and to hopefully pick up the pieces of the player we started to see, again, late in 2024 and when available in 2025. Now, maybe you wonder about Ed Oliver's projection into Jim Leonhard's defense, and I'm here to tell you that you should not be concerned about that. Yes, it is going to be a 3-man front. You're going to see those odd fronts, and there's not really going to be a 3 technique, but that's okay because there's a 4-eye spot. And what's the difference between a 3 technique and a 4-eye? Well, the 3 technique lines up on the outside shoulder of the guard. The 4-eye lines up on the inside shoulder of the tackle. We're talking about 1 step over. It's going to be okay. And looking at other players that are like Ed Oliver that thrive in the role that I anticipate him having for Jim Leonhard, look at the New England Patriots and Milton Williams. Look at the Los Angeles Rams and Kobe Turner. Those are 2 very similar body types, 2 very similar players in terms of their style, and they work very well for that 3-4 defense. So Milton Williams with the Patriots is 6'3", 284 with 31.5-inch arms. Ed Oliver is 6'2", 287 with 31 3/4-inch arms. Kobe Turner with the Rams, 6'2.5", 293, 31 3/8 arms. So Players around 6'2", around 290 pounds, and sub 32-inch arms. That penetration skill, it will still be effective in this style of defense. So please ease your concerns about this not being a good scheme fit for Ed Oliver. He's going to be just fine. Now, his running mate over the last few years, we'll see what happens here. DaQuan Jones, a 2022 free agent signing. He's 34 years old. He'll turn 35 in December. His contract is expired. He completed his 2-year, $16 million deal. Now, unfortunately, there are void years on this deal, so DaQuan Jones will count $3.7 million against the 2026 salary cap, and that's the case for several players. We talked yesterday about Joey Bosa. Connor McGovern has void years that'll hit this year's cap. Matt Milano has a huge void year that will hit this year's cap. Larry Ogunjobi, it's, you try to maximize your spending and you push some of your cap charges into future years, and this is just what happens. So DaQuan Jones will count $3.7 million against a 2026 cap, regardless if he's on the team or not. So in 2025, he played in 12 games and on the field for 61% of the snaps in those 12 games. 22 tackles, 3 for loss, 21 pressures, and 3 sacks. I think of DaQuan Jones as a sufficient starter, as a one-tech. He played in some wider alignments this past year when Ed Oliver went out. In fact, he played a lot of 3 technique, and I thought in some ways he played well. He rushed the passer pretty effectively from the 3-tech spot, but that wider alignment doesn't help a player like DaQuan Jones. You want him tighter, right? You want him playing in the A gaps and being able to affect the quarterback with a shorter distance. And of course, that's where he's best as a run defender as well. And so as I consider his 2026 outlook, he feels like a player to me that's run his course in Buffalo. He's going to turn 35 in December. His contract is expired. I think he's a solid player, but this is a good opportunity to transition. I just don't think you can find yourself overly concerned about players in their mid-30s on expiring contracts and feeling like you have to bring them back. DaQuan Jones, the last couple of years, has battled injuries. He had the calf deal this past season, and I just worry about some of the age and mileage on him and how that's leading to more injuries. He had a stretch of his career where he was almost never hurt, and then the last few years he's been kind of banged up. And so I think this is your opportunity to move on. And I think a younger version of DaQuan Jones would be ideal to be the nose tackle, even for this Jim Leonhard defense. But I think DaQuan Jones has kind of run his course, and we'll see what's next for him. All right. We got some important players to talk about next. Deion Walker, TJ Sanders, 2 draft picks that played a good amount in 2025. What did we learn about them and what's important to consider moving forward? We'll dive into that here next. So folks, be sure to stick with me. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. You'll get the drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast, speed skating races decided by inches, hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off, and FanDuel will keep you locked in to all the competition during the entire Olympic experience. It'll be engaging from start to finish. So the Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, the Bills drafted a couple of defensive tackles in the 2025 draft that will be important pieces moving forward. So let's talk about Deion Walker first, a 2025 4th-round pick, number 109 overall. He is young. He's only 21 years old. He doesn't turn 22 until March. He's entering year 2 of his 4-year, $5.2 million rookie deal. And in 2025, he appeared in 17 games, was on the field for 47% of the defensive snaps, 39 tackles, 8 for loss, 16 pressures, had 1 sack, 4 pass breakups, and of course that glorious playoff interception. In 2025, in terms of the review here, I think you saw show up the best parts of Deion Walker, where he's a huge person that moves really well for his size, that has really strong upper body power and length, and he's got a nose for the ball. And when he's able to kind of work laterally and use that ability to leverage the ball and use that upper body power to play off a contact, this guy can make some plays, as we've seen. And then, that shows up as a run defender. And then as a pass rusher, he's not a super consistent guy in terms of, establishing a half-man relationship and getting to the edges of blocks and finishing sacks. But we've seen him use his size and power and athleticism to compromise the depth of the pocket, to get his hands into throwing windows. That's something that he really excelled with, especially as the season moved on, was, hey, not going to be able to win every rep, but I can get my hands in throwing windows and bat down passes and affect the quarterback that way. And so I thought that was an awesome part of what he illustrated this season. Now, I think there was a lot of really good, and you saw some terrific splash plays. There's also some things for him to kind of improve upon, which I think there's two main areas. Number one is let's see if we can play with better leverage. He plays really tall. He's 6'7", and that's tough because, trench battles are still about leverage, and he's got to fight it, right, to keep his hips leveraged, to keep his pads low. So play with better leverage, but then also how he processes blocks. He's a guy that doesn't have a great feel for the down blocks. Taking on doubles can be a challenge. And so the quicker that he can process those things and get his footwork right so that he's combating the blocks effectively, I think will help take his game to the next level and reduce the plays that are littered throughout his tape of him getting worked off the ball and out of his fit because, he's playing tall and he's not stepping with enough quickness to combat the block. And now all of a sudden the blockers are in a good position and they can really wall him off. And so you did see him struggle with staying consistent with his anchor against the run. Now, again, plenty of good. I love what we've seen from him. He exceeded my expectations as a rookie. And I'm excited to see how he goes, how he develops from here as a young player that's gained some very valuable playing time and certainly made his share of splash plays, which was awesome to see. So in 2026, I'm looking for growth. Talked about leverage, talked about reading blocks, and then I'm excited to see where Jim Leonhard plans on deploying him. I think you'll see him in a couple of spots. I think he'll sometimes play the nose, and I don't know that you want him consistently there just because I don't think he's a super stout player against double teams and those down blocks, and I think you want him in some wider alignments, so I think he'll play some 5-tech, some of that 4-eye out in some wider alignments as well. So I think he'll be an inside-outside type player, which is good. And I'm excited to see how he develops because I thought he had a strong rookie season, all things considered. Next up is TJ Sanders, a 2025 second-round pick, number 41 overall. He's 22. He'll turn 23 in July. He's entering year 2 of his 4-year, $10.7 million deal. In 2025, he played in 12 games, and in those 12 games on the field for 44% of snaps, collected 16 tackles, 1 for loss, 13 pressures, and 1 sack. And so TJ Sanders had an interesting rookie season where he started off, getting time as a 3 technique, kind of behind Ed Oliver. You're kind of waiting on Larry Ogunjobi to come back. And then he has a knee injury, and he's out weeks 5 through 10. And then he comes back from injury as a rookie, and he's playing mostly defensive end for the next 5 games. And then over the last 3 games, he transitions back to the 3 technique spot. I certainly wanted more impact from TJ Sanders, and he's a guy that I'm looking for to take a big step forward this coming season. I do think a lot about the circumstances that he went through as a player that, got his feet wet, got injured, came back, played a different spot. I think those variables make it difficult for him to settle in and play his best ball. I think defensive tackle inside in particular is a slower developing position to the next level. And, I don't think TJ Sanders was given a great opportunity to stick in a spot and figure it out. So I think what he went through this past year will benefit him moving forward, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't missing impact as a rookie. And so as you project him in 2026, I think he's going to have to play that 5-tech, 4-eye type role. Think of the John Franklin Myers type player that we saw for Denver. I think this is kind of where TJ Sanders is going to have to live. He's certainly not going to play the nose. And, he's a guy that I think is probably more naturally around the 290-pound mark. And so I'd let him I wouldn't force him to add a lot of weight. I think he'd be fine around 290 if he's going to play that 4-eye, 5-technique type spot as a John Franklin Myers type player. So get stronger, learn the new position, and I think he'll be fine in that 290 range. But he's going to have to adjust here and hopefully fulfill the promise of being a pretty high second-round pick that the team traded up to get. So I'm optimistic about TJ Sanders. I just wish there was more from his rookie season that we could point to give us excitement. And, obviously the whole bouncing around and injured part of the rookie season was difficult as well. Let's talk Larry Ogunjobi, a 2025 free agent signing, 31 years old. He'll turn 32 in June. His contract is expired. He signed a 1-year, $6.9 million deal. And $2.6 million of that will count against the 2026 cap as a void year so that the Bills could have him last season. In 2025, he played in 10 games, and in those 10 games, 38% of the snaps defensively, 19 tackles, 4 for loss, 5 pressures, no sacks, and a massive jump offsides penalty in the playoff loss to Denver. What a disappointing year. This is one of the big black eye moves of the Brandon Beane tenure, a player that they agreed to terms with. He shows up. He tells Brandon Beane about the suspension. They meet behind the closed doors. They come out. They sign the deal. Despite that knowledge of the suspension, and he misses the first 6 games. And, of course, I'm watching him during preseason and training camp, and I'm not getting excited about anything that he shows. Then he disappears for 6 weeks. Comes back and just makes no positive impact. In fact, I would say he was mostly negative. He was washed out of his run fits, no impact as a pass rusher, and you really needed him, right? Ed Oliver goes down. Like, this is a player that should have been able to step in and help this defense. Instead, you're still looking for answers. You're still, having to play Fedarian Mathis. You're having Larry Ogunjobi as a healthy scratch late in the season when you absolutely need it. I mean, just a massively disappointing addition. Massively disappointing. And so for the 2026 outlook, I wish him well. But I don't see a path for him coming back to Buffalo, and that was a major, major flop of a signing this offseason. All right, coming up next, the Bills have some players that we still need to talk about. Some that were on practice squad, some that were injured, that are part of the mix for next season. So we'll get to them and then kind of zoom out and talk about this position group from a big picture, identifying what the Bills have and what they need. So we'll do that next. So folks, be sure to stick with me. Tax season does not have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a local, trusted expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives you real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, there's a handful of players that are in the mix or were in the mix that I want to mention briefly. First of all, Dwayne Carter. a 2024 third-round pick who popped his Achilles in preseason and missed the entire season. He's 25 years old. I think of him as a penetration style 3 technique. I know the Bills were going to play him as a 1 tech in Sean McDermott's defense. And he's a player that I do kind of struggle to project to the Jim Leonhard defense. I kind of hate saying that as a 2024 third-round pick and not really loving the projection. And the same thing about Landon Jackson. I mean, we talked about him on the previous episode, and he's another recent third-round pick, right? That it's just like, I'm a little confused on how this one's going to come together. I'm hopeful. There's athleticism. There's some traits there, but it's a little bit of a challenging projection. And with Dwayne Carter, I didn't come away from his rookie season super excited about what he showed there. So we'll see what the Bills can salvage here. But I am concerned. Phi Mathis, 27 years old. He was part of the mix this past year, was a 2022 second-round pick of the Commanders, injured as a rookie, and then he played 200 snaps in 2023, 250 snaps in 2024. Then he was released, spent last year's offseason with the Jets. He gets released before the season, and he winds up being a practice squad addition for the Bills that eventually gets signed to the active roster, and he played 120 snaps in 6 games for Buffalo. I like his effort. I think he plays really hard. I just think he's a very limited player. His anchor against the run is poor. I don't really see much pass rush upside here. I will say that he's a guy that from a measurables perspective and what he did at Alabama and what he was drafted to do by Washington is kind of that 3-4 nose tackle role. I just want a lot more firmness against the run for that type of role. And the pass rush appeal here is really, really limited. So he's an expired contract. I don't know that there's going to be much urgency to have him back. Again, I thought he played hard, but I think he's a really limited football player. Jordan Phillips was in the mix, 34, or he's 33. He'll turn 34 in September. Played 202 snaps in 11 games with the Bills this past season. And then he had a season-ending foot injury late in the year and wasn't available down the stretch. I feel like Jordan Phillips is a Sean McDermott special. I don't know if the same annual reunion and energy for that reunion will exist now moving forward. I don't know if it's Buffalo or bust anymore, right? Jordan Phillips was a player that's the last couple of years said, I'm playing for the Bills or nobody. I don't know if that'll be the case or not. And I don't think he's a super clean projection of this defense. He's certainly not a nose tackle. And I think at this point in his career, I don't know if him playing out towards that 5 tech or that 4-eye is going to work, just based on how limited he is as an athlete and how poor his anchor has always been against the run. So I think that'll be it for Jordan Phillips, but we'll see. There's also Zion Logue, who turns 25 in July. He's been part of the mix the last 2 years. If you recall, he was a late-round pick by the Falcons in 2024. Then the Bills had him in the mix last year on the practice squad, called him up for a couple of games. And then this past year, he was on the practice squad and played in 3 games in 59 snaps in 3 games. And so one thing I'll say about Zion Logue is he does kind of have the body type to be a nose tackle, right? He's slapped together really well, has length. He's a big, thick dude. And I think he showed some ability to be firm against the run. And so he signed a futures deal and he's back in the mix. And I do have a level of curiosity about, if there's a role that he can fill this coming season. I think at a minimum, he probably has a chance to be a practice squad guy that provides some deep depth at the nose, but we'll see if he can put it all together and maybe earn a roster spot and maybe a role for this defense, because I think there is some cleanliness, if you will, to how he projects. It's really kind of different than, the conversations we've had about guys like Dwayne Carter. And then lastly, Tommy Akingbezote, Cowboys 2025 7th-round pick out of Maryland. He signed to the Bills practice squad ahead of the Chiefs game, and he never was elevated to the active roster, but he was on the practice squad for like half the season, and then he signed a futures deal with the team. So he's in the mix, 6'4", 306 pounds, has long arms. I'm not going to pretend like I know a ton about him. I didn't study him in college, but he is part of the mix, and we'll see how he fits in. So what do the Bills have? What do they need? Well, they've got Ed Oliver. That's cool. I like that. They've got Deion Walker and TJ Sanders, who are young players entering their second seasons. That'll kind of have to transition. I think it's less of a transition for Deion Walker. He played a similar type of defense in Kentucky, and I think he'll be pretty comfortable with this. I don't really have much concerns about Oliver and Walker. I do think that there's an adjustment for Sanders. But that's pretty much what the Bills have. Other than that, it's Dwayne Carter, Zion Logan, and Tommy Akingbasothe. I mean, not much, right? Not much. And so what do they need? They need quite a bit. I think the number one need here is a true nose tackle. And so I think you could look at this defensive line as a 3-down front next year being Ed Oliver as a 4-eye, a nose tackle that you acquire, right? That could be a draft pick. That could be a veteran. You know, there's going to be options there. A Roy Lopez type player, a Crisis Tonga type player. You know, there's different types of players that we could talk about now that will fit this defense. So I think they need to start Ed Oliver at the 4-eye. You'll acquire a nose, and I think you play Walker as your other, defensive end 5 technique type player, and then I think TJ Sanders kind of slots in behind Walker and Oliver, and I think you'll want a couple more pieces for this front, and probably 2 more that you feel comfortable playing. Some on the nose, towards the edges, maybe a true long-armed, base type player. Maybe that's Greg Rousseau that's going to fill it. I think Greg Rousseau will play a little bit of a stand-up role and a little bit on the D-line. So you have some guys that are going to be moved in some different spots, and so we'll see how it all comes together. But I think they definitely got to get that true nose tackle. I'm not talking about Ted Washington, 400 pounds, can't move, right? It's a different ball game. But you see these types of players in the league now. Think about a DJ Reader type guy or Aleem McNeil. These are like dreamy type options. Derek Brown with Carolina. Yeah, you'd love to be able to get a guy, maybe those are pretty high profile players, but find your guy that's like that, that's going to fit your defense. And the Bills have some work to do here, and it'll be important as they make this transition. So this is going to be a lot different, and that's good. I think that's a good thing. That defense under Sean McDermott didn't show up when it needed to. And I think the new style, the new energy, the new scheme is all really necessary for this Bills defense to finally do what it needs to do in supporting Josh Allen to go to the damn Super Bowl and win it, right? I'm recording this thing on Monday morning. I just watched, of course, last night, the Patriots and Seahawks. And I don't know how you don't watch these Super Bowls and continue to think, man, the defensive line play is so critical. So critical. You need guys that can affect football games up front. Eagles had it in a big way last year. Seattle, of course, had it. And this isn't like new revolutionary stuff. It's always been true. But the Bills got to get the right mix up here and for it to show up when it matters, because I think at the core of the playoff wall that the Bills have hit, it's been just lacking impact from the defensive line. So I'm excited to see these young players take a step. I'm excited for the new scheme, and I'm excited for the new additions. They need it all. They need it all to work out for this team to do what we want them to do. So there you have it. Defensive tackles in the books. We've done edge rushers as well. So we got linebackers, corners, safeties to close out this week, and that'll set the foundation for all the conversations we'll start having next week about free agency, the draft, trade opportunities. We'll really put together that checklist of what Brandon Beane has to get done. So hope you're enjoying this. Hope you continue to be along for the journey. We're not going anywhere. Bills football conversations for you every day, all year long here on Locked On Bills. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.